Thank you, Robin. It's great to be here.
Good to see you again. And we're really looking forward to the second in our series with Ethan Chernofsky, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Placer.ai on what's in store for retail. Big topic, huh? Anyway, we're going to take a look at the retail recovery with a deeper dive for all sectors and brands leading the way forward. And of course, there's no guesswork here. Ethan is going to break down the latest location data from the retail recovery to analyze the top performing brands and sectors and the trends driving their success. And of course, what it all means moving forward. Now, you're going to have a chance to ask questions, but wait until after we talk and dig deeper into the winners and losers emerging from the pandemic. And during the conversation, if you've got questions, just put them into the Q&A link. Okay, Ethan, let's get into it.
let's do it. So, as always, I'll give the quick background on Placer before we kind of dive into the content itself. So,
yeah, please.
The data that you're going to see today, how do we get it? So we observe a panel of 30 million devices throughout the United States. Very critically, this is all anonymized aggregate data. So we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We are a privacy by design company. So we get this panel, we observe this anonymized data, and then we use it as a kind of foundation to run machine learning and AI algorithms to make estimations on the visits to any retail location anywhere in the US. We then present that data in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from true trade areas, the customer journey, void analysis, visit counts, and much, much more to try and give ourselves the most accurate picture of what's actually happening in the retail world. For anyone that is interested, there is a free version of this product on our website at Placer.ai. There's also a whole bunch of free tools that we make available to the public at Placer.ai in a section called The Square. And with that, Robin, we can dig in.
Well, Ethan, here's an overused buzzword, omnichannel, right? But from what I understand is you believe that we might be missing a crucial element that's blocking the sector's ability to maximize all channels. Can you give us a little more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're seeing in this graph is actually kind of the true trade areas of location. So on the left, it's actually a neighborhood goods location in Dallas, Texas. On the upper left, to the left is an Everlink location in New York. And what's kind of fascinating about these locations is you see this really tremendous reach. But in general, when we talk about physical stores, we're not discussing things like reach. We're not discussing things like the people who pass through. We're not talking about elements like marketing value. And it's because when we discuss omnichannel, we generally take brick and mortar as a given, and we discuss all of the values of digital. So, social media, live streaming, e-commerce, obviously, and these are really important elements of the retail landscape. However, we haven't provided that same level of breadth when we look at what's going on in the store. So, to give you an example, many shopping centers will have stores penalize that location if a return happens in the store as opposed to somewhere else. Yet we know that a return in a store is less costly than a return online, not to mention the fact that it offers the opportunity for upsell. We don't talk about the fact when we consider buy online, pick up in store, a digital sale, that it by definition requires a store to pick up from. And so we haven't done a good enough job. And I say this in the side of kind of offline retail and overall as a space of trying to understand all of the values of both sides of this digital brick and mortar equation. And in so doing, we're missing out on some of the opportunities. So when we think of, there are brands that are going to launch locations, and it doesn't have to be as oriented towards people just selling product. So for example, I love the brand Untuck It. I think they're an awesome company. I will go into a location, I will try on a specific item, and I will look for the ideal fit. Later on, I will buy the exact same product in a different color, and I will do it online. But it required that initial touch point for me to feel comfortable buying the product, because I don't want to get a shirt that doesn't fit right. And so the ability to start thinking more expansively about what a store can drive starts with recognizing that it's not just, even if it's very important, it's not just about the sales that happen within the four walls. It's about the opportunity and experience they create to drive long-term revenue.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe the whole thing, Ethan. Very good points there. Yeah, another buzzword, experiential retail. Uh, Obviously, it was a major focus pre-pandemic, and do you believe that it will have the same impact in the coming months and years?
So the honest truth is, I didn't. Had we been having this conversation 3 weeks ago, what I would have said would have been incredibly different. The idea that experiential is probably going to take a lot longer to come back. The value of it is going to be lessened. When you think experiential in terms of a pure sense, so like Lululemon having a yoga studio, not necessarily experience like, hey, how do we make sure our store is interesting and exciting? But then we looked at Dick's Sporting Goods launched this House of Sports concept, and they launched it in Rochester, New York. Now, no disrespect to Rochester, it is a wonderful area, but it's not like the retail mecca, of the United States, or even potentially of upstate New York. And so to see them do that was really interesting because it gives us this really valuable opportunity to measure what an experiential experience can provide. And we looked at Dick's at the House of Sports location compared to other locations, and they were consistently driving 80% more visits than nearby locations on average.
Wow.
Their median visit duration was significantly higher than the nationwide average and then those of nearby locations. So meaning that more people were coming, they were coming from a farther distance, and they were spending more time there. So what's really interesting is that even with the lingering pandemic concerns and the Delta variant, we're seeing that there is this pull to providing something different with the location. What's fascinating is that you have this really strongly performing brand like Dick's Sporting Goods, and they're launching these concepts from a position of strength in order to say, all right, what else can we do? And how can we deepen the relationship? And I think it goes back to what we were saying in the slide before of it's not just about the sales. It's about creating that type of relationship that's going to bring those sales, whether it's online or offline, back to to that brand over time.
Yeah, boy, that's the future for sure. So this notion of owned retail, okay? Warby Parker's going public. Nike is expanding their footprint. How significant is this really, this own retail wave? And what are the wider implications, Ethan, do you think?
So this is maybe my favorite retail trend in my time at Placer. And there's two reasons. One, because it's just absolutely fascinating, but also because it's one where when taken to its natural logical conclusion, it creates a true win-win-win. And by that, I mean a win for shopping center owners from the real estate side, a win for the retailers themselves, and a win for the consumer. But to start with why this is such an interesting trend, it's because of what we discussed before. Brands are recognizing that there is a lot to be done offline that goes beyond just sales. So the CEO of Everlane said in the end of 2019 that the worst kept secret in retail is that online only is not profitable at scale. And so they have to come offline because they need places to distribute from, and they need places to, encourage those returns to be cheaper, and they need the ability to sell and to drive the brand awareness. But we spoke to a brand not that long ago that said they were moving a significant portion of their fleet their focus away from online to an offline fleet to major malls just for the eyeballs, because the eyeballs were actually cheaper than trying to grab them online in their specific sector. And so that click that has a 1% conversion rate, having someone walk past you in a mall can actually be a more valuable experience to some brands. And so this own retail thing is really interesting because you have more players who want to get into the mix. And what does that create? It creates greater diversity in terms of the retailers that are out there. And the outcome of that greater diversity is the most exciting thing because it says there's more optionality. So if I'm a shopping center or a major mall and I'm trying to figure out what my ideal mix is, I have more brands to try and lure, to try and figure out that perfect mix for the environment I'm trying to create. It creates more diversity in the sense that not all malls have the exact same mix of stores. So there's a reason to go to one weekend and another the next, as opposed to kind of everything being there's this feeling of copy and paste. And by the way, this is happening while we're seeing malls reduce the percentage of focus on retail and move it more towards entertainment and experience and food and beverage. And the last bit here that's important is the concept of the store as a platform. And so what's interesting is online brands, and I think Nike had the kind of the earth-shattering moment when they left Amazon, but brands are owning their experience online. And when people look for a brand online, they're not usually looking at others. We did some really interesting research with SimilarWeb, which is a digital intelligence company that found some really strong evidence in that area. But that means that the store can be a platform. So if I'm Warby Parker and I have this amazing rollout of products within the eyewear space, how crazy is it that at some point I'll dedicate a section of my store to selling the hats from a small direct to consumer brand, or the sunglasses from someone else? And this idea of the store as a platform is something we believe you're going to start hearing about quite a bit, because it's a place where having space and having reach provides a huge advantage to those who don't have that access yet.
Yeah, I remember the metric that consumers who have more than one platform to choose from will spend 3 to 5 times more on that brand or on that store. I don't know where I got that, but that metric sticks out of my head. So what about outdoor malls and outlet centers, which had kind of a unique advantage during the pandemic? How can they sustain this strength, do you think, Ethan? And what do you expect from indoor malls, for example?
So this is another topic that I love, just because there was this really intense kind of conventional wisdom that malls are dying. And I think the reality is some are. Clearly, there's elements of truth there. I think there's a middle tier that's probably going to reshape itself, in some cases very dramatically, in other cases just minor shifts. But I think when you look at kind of that top tier Class A mall, they're doing incredibly well. I mean, our data shows that in July, they were basically flat with July 2019. July 2019 was a good back to school season. It was a strongly performing retail season. And our index looks at 100 indoor malls across the country. So there are still regions that are recovering more slowly. So there are those who are doing better than they were in 2019. And the interesting element here is, I think a lot of the things we're talking about now, there are mall owners that were already thinking about this 4 or 5 years ago, and they were beginning the process of evolving forward, shrinking the amount of focus on retail, increasing the amount of focus on restaurants and food and beverage and experiences. And that continuation is only going to position them to present more and more unique experiences. What's been fascinating is we're actually seeing that the trade areas, so the places where people are coming from to a location, are bigger than they were in 2019. So not only are people coming back to the mall, they're willing to go further distances to go to these regional hubs, which is a really exciting thing if I'm a mall owner of one of these Class A malls, because this concept of I am the regional powerhouse from a retail, entertainment, food and beverage perspective is something that can be really deepened. On the outdoor side, I think there's a really exciting opportunity to say, you've come to us in these situations, not necessarily because you would have normally, but because you feel better outside. How do we then turn that situation into loyalty that's going to keep you coming back more and more? So slight evolutions of the model, figuring out better what are the right tenants that are going to make that draw. And this is especially true when we think about outlet centers, because this, inflation, supply chain issues, it's going to limit supply, and therefore the outlet, hey, you're going to get a huge value, drive 2 hours to this outlet center, is going to shift differently, is going to shift a bit, at least in the short term. And it's going to have to be more about our experience that we provide is amazing. And so that is, I think, where I think both sectors are moving very similarly.
Yeah, but they're going to have do something compelling enough to get the consumer to travel that far.
So the question I think, aren't we learning that it's compelling? That the mall, as much as it might, again, were we over mauled as a country? Yes. But good malls were compelling. People were willing to go. They were going as recent as the last recent period we have, which is 2019. And people were willing to travel to these great malls. And so I think there's so much to learn from those top performers. Yeah. And there's room for creativity and redefining what the mall can and should provide.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ethan. And it'll happen. And you're right, we'll lose some. So, we're seeing the boundaries of office, retail, residential, and real estate break down into what they call more mixed use. So how does this impact retail performance and decision making?
So it's fascinating because it basically says all of the old rules, they don't necessarily apply. So I'll give you an example that I love. If you look at Industrious, which is a co-working space that sets itself up in malls. If I'm in a mall with an Industrious, or I own a mall with an Industrious, is it crazy to have like a small format Staples concept in the mall? If I have people coming in 5 days a week to go to work? No. Is it crazy to like have a mini grocery format in a mall for the people who are working there every day and just want to get quick things? No, it's not crazy anymore. It doesn't mean it's the ideal, but it increases the creativity and optionality. And what's so exciting here is you're seeing in this slide is actually the Westfield Garden State Plaza. It's showing their massive reach, and it's showing that much of that reach happens on Saturdays. It's showing that much of those hours are in like kind of the mid and late evening hours. And what's fascinating is in 2019, the Garden State Plaza told us that they were going to be launching office towers and residential towers near the mall. And at the same time, they were putting a bigger focus on food and beverage and a bigger focus on fitness centers. And the idea was, if we build residential, we build office, we're going to have people to go to those gyms. We're going to have people to go to those restaurants on a regular basis and augment that, Friday, Saturday strength with every other day of the week. And that is, I think, what's so exciting about the blurring of these lines is that there's so many more options. There's so many more opportunities to say, hey, could a shopping center that I never would have considered before all of a sudden be an amazing opportunity for me? And I think we're only going to see that grow as we see brands take risks. So we look at a Market by Macy's, or we look at Bloomies, or we look at Sephora going into Kohl's. That we are living in this period of like tremendous unconventional tests. And if we start seeing some of these begin to work, expect the copycats, expect that flow of people trying to find those next big ideas for their brands. And it'll create a lot of really exciting opportunities for a lot of different companies.
Yeah, there's a million different platforms through which you can distribute your products and your services. And it's just mushroomed. Before the pandemic, and now it's continuing on. That's a very good perspective. And I've written a lot about that.
Yeah.
Even competitive brands being on their competitors' platform, which is a very interesting topic. So, the work from home thing, big deal. I mean, and how significant do you think the trend is? And how should retailers adapt to this?
I love working from home, and I think that's turned me into a skeptic about how significant work from home is. And so, we've heard talk of some of the companies that have been very open about, oh yeah, work from home forever, buying up office space in really expensive areas. So I have my reasons that I don't necessarily think it's going to be, everyone working from home 3 or 4 days a week. I do think that though, even if it stays in just a small fashion, so people are given flexibility, people are given 1 or 2 days a week from home, that will still have a really significant impact. And there are brands that are really well positioned to take advantage. And what's fascinating is this is one of those areas where our perception of the world pre-pandemic and our perception of the world post or in this recovery period could be very different. So take a brand like Starbucks. I love talking about them because I love Starbucks. But they're a fantastic example of this kind of discrepancy. So we heard a lot about Starbucks moving to much more convenience-oriented formats. And that makes a lot of sense in an urban environment where people are popping in on their way to work, they're on the move, and they want to grab their coffee, breakfast, and go. But when you think about the suburbs, isn't Starbucks maybe better positioned than anyone if work from home takes even just a little bit? Because as we're working from home, and it's great working from home, but you do get a little bit stir crazy and you need to get out of the house a little bit. And so what better place is there to pop over to your favorite kind of cafe, get a cup of coffee, if you're me, a blueberry muffin, maybe even a sandwich. And all of a sudden at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, not the peak time for Starbucks in a suburban environment, you're getting a customer who's giving you a larger transaction than normal. And that is a crazy opportunity, but it says not convenience, but space, the ability to sit and spend an hour and a half there in a time when they're not filled anyway. And so I think more brands, whether it's the Paneras, the Dunkins, the local coffee shop, restaurants, there's these really interesting opportunities to say, how can I make work from home work for me?
Yeah. Well, it's also going to have a tremendous impact on commercial real estate in terms of
Yeah.
businesses and offices and stuff. Commercial real estate's going to go up, I think, take a dive. Anyway, that's a whole other subject too. Maybe we'll do another one of these. Anyway,
Amen.
the middle. The middle is always being crushed from the top and the bottom. Anyway, uh, you not only reject the death of the middle argument, you actually think quite the opposite. So explain yourself, Ethan.
So I will kind of raise my hand that I was a proponent of this concept early, but I think it was because I like to say the bifurcation of retail is the only time I could figure out what the word bifurcation meant, and it made me sound smart. But the crazy thing was when we looked at the data, it just didn't line up. And the example we love to give here is Target, right? So if you think about this death of the middle argument, the idea is value is a very clear lane and tons of value there. Luxury, name luxury brands, there's tons, the competition's there, and people are willing to spend on luxury items, right? So I'm willing to spend value, I'm willing to spend luxury. What's the middle doing? It doesn't really understand who it is or what it's supposed to provide. But I would argue that the middle is about understanding that nuance. And I think Target's the perfect example. So Target has Apple in its locations. They have Ulta in its locations. They have Casper in its locations, Disney in its locations. And, Disney's my favorite example about this because if you've ever bought a present for a child, a Disney branded item, you know that it is absolutely not the cheapest item. And in fact, is generally far more expensive than the same thing from another brand. And so, if I'm willing to spend, extra dollars on my, Anna and Elsa towel for my child, I'm not always looking for value. I am looking for a specific type of value. So I don't want to spend the full price on socks or underwear, but I do want to, I am willing to spend more on my mobile device or on, again, toys for my kids. And that's what makes Target so brilliant is that they understand the middle. The middle is about a give and take. And this, I think where it stems from is Target's really focused approach to merchandising. So every store can be different in order to provide the right goods to the right people in the right environment. And as we see the strength of brands like Target, and I think Kohl's also represents this, and you see them bringing in kind of Sephora into their locations, which is a clear middle move. Sephora is not a value brand. Ulta fits this, Dick's fits this. You're seeing players from the value lane start to push their way up. And it's
Yeah.
not because they think it's harder there. It's because they recognize that there's a massive lane with little competition. If you look at visit share amongst Walmart, Big Lots, Dollar General, Five Below, you see Walmart's visit share shrinking. Not dramatically. Walmart is still incredibly strong and powerful, but it is harder for them to compete with the incredibly wide array of brands that are aiming for that lane and growing and expanding and doing a very good job. And yet the middle is a lot more empty. And I think that's been part of the magic of Target's success is that they understood this audience that so many had given up for dead and really figured out how to offer it. And that's why Dollar General is launching Pop Shelf. And that's why Walmart is shifting a little bit more up market. And that's why Five Below is doing some similar actions. It's because it's not there. While there is definitely opportunities in the value lane and huge opportunities in the luxury lane, the middle is not dead. The middle just requires more sophistication in how they're reached.
That's a huge point. In fact, all these things that we're talking about here are very good. You're raising some very new perspectives for many of us. So, let's talk about the giants for a second here. What do these brands have in common, and what enables them to succeed, seemingly regardless of the wider circumstances, if you will?
So I think what sets most of these brands apart, and it's the same is true in other spaces, but I think these four certainly live this kind of thesis, is they operate in the nice to have. And what I mean by that is if anyone's ever spoken to a technology company, you have always been told, is your product a need or is it a nice to have? And the problem with that question is if something is a need and you don't already have it, you are late to the game and you are probably suffering as a result. If your product is a nice to have, it means not everyone's there yet. people are on their way. So Target invested heavily in buy online, pick up in store technology, in delivery technologies, in better ways to provide a good customer experience, in their owned labels when they weren't doing that well, and it was considered more of a stretch at the time. Walmart has invested heavily in technology on the e-commerce front. They bought Jet for a very large amount of money.
$3.5 billion.
It wasn't a $3.5 billion success with Jet, but the company learned how to do e-commerce so well.
Yes.
They live in the nice to have, and they live in an innovative mindset. And one of my favorite examples for this is Best Buy. If you looked at Best Buy last year, in May, when reopenings were beginning, Best Buy did their reopening in May with appointment-only visits. Appointment-only visits was brilliant at the time because it said, I can limit the number of people who come to my stores. I don't need to have lines outside, and I can help improve the likelihood that the person coming has a lot of intent. And it's genius because for Best Buy, it helps them filter who comes in the door. And what's crazy is this idea has vast applications. If I'm Nordstrom's or Bloomingdale's, imagine if every Wednesday or Tuesday, which are not the busiest days, in my off-peak hours, I offered appointment-only personal shopping. You come in, I walk you through the store. I'm there when you try things on. I'm telling you what looks good and what I think maybe you should try something a little different. And it's in an off-peak hour, and it's giving you value, and it's helping make sure the person with intent comes to the store. But it's thinking really creatively about how do you provide value for your customer in a way that makes them want to shop. And obviously I'm a big fan of many of these brands, but they really understand their audiences. The Geek Squad for Best Buy is another great example. They recognize that it's not a technology product is not just the thing I buy. It's if the thing I buy is working 6 months from now and the stress that comes with that. And by offering this Geek Squad thing, I alleviate the stress. I make you fall in love with me as a brand because not only am I giving you the thing you want, I'm making sure it works. And there are so many opportunities to apply that same logic across the board. Think Costco. I have never walked into a Costco and bought the list of things I planned on buying. It is always, basket is always 6 times more. And I've never been upset about it because it's wonderful. The experience is great. I like it. And if you can figure out how to provide that experience, live in the nice to have, I think you have an opportunity to really drive value for your customers and then ultimately for the retailer themselves.
Yeah. So, Ethan, you're giving away all this stuff for nothing. Anyway, it's great. So, you talked a little about Ulta and Sephora, this whole beauty sector. It has obviously some of the most interesting shifts going on, like with those two brands, driving, new partnerships. What do you think the outlook for the sector is?
Oh, I think it's going to do so well. I think this pent up demand, and we haven't gone to work. We haven't gone to these big events to the same extent that we did in the past. And people miss it. And so this push towards kind of beauty and makeup is going to be significant. At the same time, the wellness concept that I think was already happening and was deepened by the pandemic, that's not going anywhere. So creams and lotions and how to feel good on the days when I am at home, that's not disappearing. And so I think that combination of forces is giving them this wider arsenal than they had pre-pandemic. And these were brands that were, I think it's hard to, find me a better brand than Ulta at this stage. And, the fact that all of a sudden they're getting boosts like this is really significant. I think the new balance that we're likely going to find in this kind of new normal is going to be even more suited to the value that these brands provide and likely bring a huge lift in the coming months and years.
Yeah. When Sephora was at JCPenney, their space yielded $600 a square foot versus the rest of the store, which I think was around $200 a square foot. So there you have incredible success.
They were experiential before any of us were talking experiential.
Oh yeah.
You walked in and they, that was what they did.
I know. And of course, they'll continue to do the same thing at Kohl's. So what can the wider kind of retail landscape kind of learned from the unique success of grocery and pharmacy, for example, during the recovery period?
So I think what's been fascinating about grocery is they obviously did really well during the pandemic, but many of these brands are doing somehow relatively even better now, which means that they won over customers during, and they maintain that strength when the environment was no longer as uniquely suited for it. What that tells me, and I think what it could tell a lot of brands, is we have lightning in a bottle moments. There are times where things just work in our favor, and it doesn't matter what type of company you are, you just have those kind of those waves. And if you're situated to take advantage of them, it's not just about taking advantage in the short term. It's about creating something that's going to drive long-term success. So when I look at a brand like Publix, it wasn't just the fact that they were providing a good experience before, or that they were there for their customers during the pandemic. It's that they were able to upgrade their experience so that the customers that came during the pandemic fell in love with it and kept on coming more as the recovery continued. I think it's, pharmacy is another really interesting example. If you look at a brand like CVS, who basically has done these really innovative approaches to how do I get you in my door? If I get you in the door, it's the Costco thing again. Good luck going to CVS and not buying 6 more things than you planned on getting. And they are figuring out ways, whether it's the vaccine, whether it's this health and wellness push. Again, they are also operating in that beauty space to a degree. The idea that they're health hubs that they launch in a wide extent. There is so many opportunities for brands to look at places that aren't in the same sector or even operating in the same environment and say, all right, what are the applications of what CVS is doing that I can learn from my own experience, even if we're in wildly different spaces?
Yeah. Another metric, pre-pandemic, only 3% of groceries were ordered online, right?
Yeah.
During the pandemic, I think it was like 33%. And that I am told by experts that is going to prevail going forward. So it's just what you're talking about.
What's interesting? I will push back on that metric because we are really into the grocery space. And online grocery is really significant. It is absolutely going places. I can rattle you off a list of amazing companies doing incredible work there. Depending on who you ask, is exactly as you said, it was 2 to 4% during the pandemic of the overall pie. What it was, if you looked at other countries in the world, it spiked, and places with online delivery, obviously, and it dropped back to about 4 to 6% within 6 months. And I think that's what's going to happen similarly in the US. So you're talking massive growth for the online grocery sector, huge opportunities. But as an overall element, we like going to the grocery store. We like going to the mall. We like going to stores. And I think that the more we embrace that reality, the more it tells brands that your job is to make sure that the person who is laying their cards on the table and telling you what they like, that the experience matches and makes it worth continuing to come. Because there's a grocery store. I mean, Rob, we all have the grocery store that we love and the one that we hate. And the one that we love does something, and it's whether it's the products, whether it's the way we're greeted, whether it's the kind of meal kits or prepared food that they have. There are those elements that are the huge draw. And it's not just grocery, it's everything. It's what is going to get someone in the store. And then once you get them there, how do you provide that experience that says, well, the next time I need something, I got to go back there. I loved it last time.
Am I correct that Kroger is testing kitchens in its stores?
Yeah.
And are people going to be able to eat there like a restaurant?
So I think part of it is like a ghost kitchen concept, like how do we get into the delivery game? But it's brilliant. Think about prepared food. I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania. Wegmans is our gold standard. They have a large prepared food section that in a time when QSR is doing so well, how crazy is it for the grocery store to say, hey, you get the groceries you need for 4 or 5 days, but tonight do this for dinner, and it's delicious and it's healthy and you're going to love it.
Yeah, that's great. So before we go to Q&A, Nordstrom and Planet Fitness are not always categorized together, right? But you see these brands and others as part of a wider trend of, testing and flexibility, which, you've kind of touched on throughout this thing. So give us a little further color on that.
I think there's two things that I really makes me kind of go head over heels for a brand. And it doesn't have to be a brand that I personally shop at a ton. And it's knowing how to adapt and kind of provide something good for the customer and recognizing opportunities, even in difficult situations. And the other is testing, diversification, all that. Like how do we constantly try to get better? And I think when you look at brands like Nordstrom Rack, and you think about Bloomingdale's and Bloomies, and you think about Neiman and their different concepts, and Macy's, what I love about it is it's brands who are trying to figure out what their next step looks like. And obviously it's not easy. And obviously there are challenges, but it's so much better to see someone who is saying, how do we take the company forward? How do we find that next big win for us from a base? If it's not if it's strength, all the better. But if it's not strength, at least it's not, oh, well, we have to do it from desperation. It's about constantly looking for those places. So the brands that make those shifts look to diversify, look to spread their eggs amongst more baskets. I think it's really important. So when you think about a brand like Gap, not being as dedicated to malls, but looking to off mall locations, that's part of this diversification push. And it's something I think we should be lauding. And then in Planet Fitness, again, not normally the classic example here, but we had their VP of real estate on a webinar. We were asking him about what did you do? I mean, you're the value model gym. People can't come to the gym anymore. The narrative was essentially goodbye gyms. If anything, during the pandemic, we didn't want to be gross and sweaty around hundreds of other gross and sweaty people. Like that was the antithesis of what we were looking for. Right. And yet, when you look at their numbers, they're back. They're not only doing what they were at, they're above 2019 levels. And what's fascinating is what he said. He's like, it was about recognizing that we needed to be where the customer was, even if that wasn't our business model. So we put more classes on our app, and we reached out to them, and we froze their subscriptions so they could restart them when they got back. And we said, we're going to be with you now, even though ultimately we need you to come back. And because they were with their customers in that time, it made coming back all the easier. And though we love our Pelotons, we need to remember that every basement in America has a treadmill or a stationary bike with clothes draped all over it. And that doesn't mean that treadmills are bad. Treadmills are great. And for some people, they're the best. Home gyms can be amazing, but very often it's a mix. And so I want to go to Planet Fitness, and I want to go to SoulCycle, and I want to have a treadmill at home, or I want to have my Peloton at home, and I want to go to this gym for my strength training. And that mix is enabled by brands who are disciplined in how they expand and grow, but also who are expansive in the way they think about meeting their customer. So being there for the customer wherever you can, with the understanding that that's going to lead to the deeper relationship that's going to give your brand a long-term boost, not just a short-term kick.
Yeah, brilliant. All of this, Ethan, is really brilliant stuff and great perspectives on in areas that I think most people wouldn't expect. So I really appreciate it, very much so.
Thank you.
Hi, Deborah.
It's fun to do this.
Hi, everyone.
She is our master of ceremonies.
Among many roles at the Robin Report.
She's our COO.
So we've got a whole bunch of questions, some pretty interesting ones. So first of all, Ethan, how much of the traffic rebound in the malls do you think is temporary, post-pandemic, as a bounce? And what do you think the trend's going to look like after an anniversary of this bounce? I don't know when that would be, 6 months, 10 months from now, but.
So I think it likely is, I think if we take other sectors as an example, what we see for most is a bump and then a return to somewhere in between. Mm-hmm. So if they do a good job, first of all, when we talk about it as an index, we expect that number to continue to grow because areas like California are still not fully back. Malls based around major cities are still not fully back because those major cities have seen migration away. People haven't come back to the same extent or in full yet. So there's still areas for more growth. But in general, you're looking to see a curve that goes up bounces back, but finds that middle ground between where it used to be and where it was at its peak. And that's that healthy place of, we enjoyed the bump, and then we returned to this place that is better, that took us to a place that was better than we were at before. Now, let's not forget, there's also the holiday season coming. So if back to school can kind of come to its completion in a strong way, hopefully this Delta variant has a cycle and it kind of dissipates.
Oh,
If
boy.
we're positioned well in the winter again, don't forget the pent-up demand for a winter out of home experience, shopping experience, is going to be very significant. COVID plays a huge role. Sadly, none of us have COVID crystal balls, but depending on the level of the kind of the pandemic's impact, you could have a really big surge in the end of the year.
Okay, then. So here's a different one. You do an analysis of what you call the giants, or we acknowledge as giants. What about the home improvement sector? Like a Home Depot, for example, which obviously all of these Lowe's, Home Depot experienced an enormous boost during the pandemic. So is that real? A same question. Is it a super bounce from the pandemic? And sort of a corollary to that is, if you did look at Home Depot, and I guess Lowe's too, would it follow the same trend line as a Costco, do you think?
So interestingly enough, we've done a lot of work on Home Depot and Lowe's. Home Depot and Lowe's, in the initial part of the pandemic, obviously Lowe's was a little bit more reopened than or open than Home Depot was, even though they both had essential retail status early. But what you saw is they surged tremendously in their kind of the height of their season, which is, March through May. And then they continued to surge all the way into their season in 2021. Now, what was interesting is, from the time that they had begun their crazy surge, we do see year-over-year visits down. So Lowe's and Home Depot are not recapturing the magic they had last year. But, and this goes to what we said before, they're ahead of where they were in 2019. So there was this crazy surge. It's not as big as it was then, but it's bigger than it was before. So the wave took them onto a different level. And I think that's what you're looking for. I'll give you a strange example, but when we first got into this, we were looking at data. We were at an event and someone asked us to look at the South Coast Plaza Mall in California. And we looked and we saw this crazy visit peak and then things drop. And we were like, oh, that's weird. I guess things aren't going that well after they had been going so well. And the person who was meeting with us was like, oh, no. Look up what was going on then. And we did. We Googled it when we're standing with them. And it was a Kim Kardashian pop-up. And it drove 4 months of insane traffic. So did they reach the same level the next year? No. But did they benefit from that? Absolutely. So I think that's the type of, it's not always the year-over-year numbers that matter. It's understanding within context of, did it take me up a notch and in terms of where I was before?
I guess you can't underestimate the power of influencers and celebrities, especially the Kardashian girls.
Nope, definitely not.
Ever. So here's another one. What does your data tell you about Main Street shopping? As so many smaller towns, the population has increased during the, mostly millennials and other people, fleeing the cities.
So I think what's interesting is, I should be more clear on the difference between the millennial and Gen Z. And I think that these downtown areas fit within a category in that regard with malls, in that they're being presented with a really powerful opportunity. So someone who is in their mid to late 30s, young family, a couple of kids, I've been living in a small apartment in New York or some other, San Francisco, or name the other kind of major urban area. And the pandemic was the kick I needed to get out. It's time to move to a house in the suburbs. I'm still looking for urban experiences. I'm still looking for interesting food. I'm still looking for, art installations and events that I want to go to. And downtown areas, malls, have a really unique opportunity to provide that middle ground, because, we might all love Starbucks and Chipotle and Chick-fil-A and whoever else, but you need something else too. And so if you can be the area that provides that experience, I think there's going to be a very significant bump and a spreading of the wealth in that regard away from just major cities.
I wonder, to that point, if the Museum of Modern Art and the Met and a lot of other museums will end up opening way more museum stores in suburban suburban locations than they have to date, just to that point, along with all the gourmet food stores and stuff, but we'll see. So you talked a lot about the middle. So someone wants to know, do you ever track the luxury market? Because what's essential to those customers is very different than what is essential to a Target or a Walmart customer. So luxury seems to be bulletproof at this point. What's the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that. I think they are bulletproof, and it's always important when you're looking at location data to think of context. So there are certain places where a visit means something different. So a visit to a luxury store carries more weight because of the size of the basket, right? It's one of the things that we saw change with the pandemic of like mission-driven shopping, and so lesser visitors could still equal more revenue because people were buying more with each visit. Costco is a phenomenal example of that. One point we saw that their visits were down 2%, but their visits per visitor were down 20 something percent, which meant that they had more people coming, just coming much less often. Mm-hmm. So luxury generally benefits from the fact that those basket sizes can be high. They're also benefiting from an element where international and even domestic travel has been severely limited. So mm-hmm. people with money to spend, they're going to spend some of it, and they're going to spend it on things that give them an escape. And if it's not a trip to France or a trip somewhere else, maybe it's a trip to the mall and spending some extra on an item that would be exciting. I think in that luxury area, the idea of what's interesting, and I'll go on this rant, is we talk a lot about people having more disposable income because of having been able to save during the pandemic.
Right.
There is a group of people who definitely has more disposable income, and that's, I think, the luxury sector. For the rest, maybe the middle is slightly different, but there is still a large degree of economic uncertainty. And by that, I mean, the COVID is not going away. We don't know what's happening in terms of more shutdowns and more furloughs and more, you don't know. And so just because we've been able to save more doesn't mean there's not concern. And that means that I think the value lane is still alive and well. People are going to be looking to, even if they want to spend, they're going to be looking to make sure they tighten a little bit so that they're prepared for the madness that could, in theory, ensue in the coming months.
Okay, thank you. Here's another one. Do you think the traditional retail commercial relationship based on rent per square foot between the landlords and tenants is changing? And if so, how do retail landlords find revenue consistency that their shareholders are demanding?
So there's two things. One, I do think it's changing. I don't think it's a wholesale shift. I think it depends on every specific company and what you're looking for, how large you are, what appetite there is for risk. In some cases, it's definitely a case-by-case basis. I would say this. One of our favorite things that we've seen in our operating in this market, and we work with both retailers and obviously large commercial real estate companies in the retail sector, is that there is a opening up of the relationship from a transparency perspective because of data. So the idea that, obviously I'm speaking about us, but this would apply to others, though clearly Placer's the best. There is the idea that you can show someone visit metrics that aren't your metrics, they're not theirs, it's an objective source, allows the guard to come down a little bit so you can focus on collaboration in a different way. And you can deepen the partnership, because ultimately, if the retailer performs well, the commercial real estate property performs well. And so the idea that there can be a boost to that collaboration is a really significant element to why data is making such an impact in the sector and enabling a better pie and a better scenario for all of those involved.
Good. So here's sort of a long question, so stick with it. First of all, this person loves your ability to map where shoppers are coming from. Says it's totally fantastic. So you mentioned that people are traveling further now to find the right centers. Do you see that continuing based on the experiences that those centers are creating? So obviously as a destination, or do you see this less distance traveling when COVID hopefully winds down and local businesses kick back in?
I think for major malls, it's going to continue, and it's going to continue for two reasons. One, you talk to that kind of tier one mall owner, and they are being really innovative. They're redeveloping properties. They're bringing new concepts to the table. They really get where the sector is going. Obviously, some more than others, but there is a real sense of leadership in that regard. So I think those regional malls are going to do incredibly well, and those distances could even increase.
Mhm.
Part of the thing that will drive that, though, is more local malls and local shopping centers shifting focus a little bit. So if my job is not to compete with the major regional mall anymore, I don't need to be 100% retail. How crazy is it to have a Costco in a mall space? How crazy is it to have a school in a mall space? Or a large, again, co-working space. There's going to be a shift in the way we look at space. And it's what we talked about before in terms of the blurring of those lines. And it's going to create a different type of equilibrium. And the companies that are ready to adapt to that changing environment, wherever they sit on that spectrum, are going to be those that are more likely to succeed, as opposed to those who say, this is how we do things, this is how we're going to continue doing things, come hell or high water, because it's possible that hell and high water are on their way.
Mm-hmm. So this might be slightly related. Do you think that the brands are going to change their KPIs based on everything that's going on today?
I think they need to. This is one of the points that we make most passionately, and it's because ultimately this is where retail is going. This is what the consumer wants. This is what the landlords need. This is what the retailers need. And so it's not there yet. But things like e-commerce uplift, we've spoken to retailers who are really looking carefully when they consider what stores to close about, you know what, we're not doing as well here, but it's driving a huge e-commerce bump. And so they're getting more creative. They're starting to leverage data more. It's the e-commerce mentality, the digitally native company is coming with the perspective. When you come from online, you have data about everything. So they're almost demanding it from an earlier stage. So many of the brands we work with only have a handful of locations. But they understand that we need data on every single one because we have data on all of our digital assets. And so that is going to drive a significant change. It's happening. The question is pace. So the faster it happens, clearly it'll be better, but it could still take some time yet.
Okay, now here's something that's sort of the in parallel to being a quant-driven company and expert. So in addition to your panels and all this extensive data that you've got, is there a store or a location or a matrix that you use intuitively or qualitatively that you could say is a bellwether of the trends?
I think it's always a mix. Data on its own is data is an input. It is not everything. Meaning, if I look at numbers and I say, oh my God, the traffic here is 0. This is the worst performing mall. But if they've closed down because they're doing a redevelopment, so you have, I know it's silly, but I'll give you a great example. We were speaking with a journalist about February data, and it was February from this year. And they were comparing it to 2020. They're like, wow, things are really down. We were like, yeah, except this February had a day less than last February, right? It was a leap year last year. And this February, Texas was destroyed by storms for about 10 days. New York was hit by crazy storms for a handful of days. Those are big states for a lot of major retailers that impacts their ability to do business. They're like, oh, you're right, I'd forgotten about that. And so quantitative inputs do not take away qualitative inputs, and qualitative inputs don't get rid of quantitative. They should be married together. And it's one of our things that we hear quite a bit is we'll speak to an owner of a commercial real estate company, and it'll be a gentleman who's a little bit more experienced, and he'll say, well, I don't know how to use data. I know how to use my gut. Like, data is your gut. Your gut is about taking in data from the world around you and coming to a conclusion. Data is just allowing you to understand what it is exactly that you're seeing, to communicate it more effectively, and to look at inputs in other ways, to maybe check out an area that you didn't have the time to fly to. So it's quantitative approaches at their best are married with qualitative approaches. They're not done in silos.
Perfect.
Yeah, great point.
So we have two last ones, and they're sort of philosophical, big picture questions.
I love it.
I knew you would. So one is a two-part. What do you think defines innovation in retail? Is there a silver bullet? And does retail need to be redefined? You talked about a platform, but that seems sort of impersonal if you're a shopper, a regular person. Is there a new and better catchphrase or term that we could call retail?
So I'll marry the two. The
Mhm.
idea of a platform seeming impersonal and the question of the innovation and the silver bullet. Is the silver bullet is who's your audience and what do they want? And it's to pull the curtain back. We had a prep call, and this was a deep part of our conversation of brands understanding, one, who they are. The brands that we're talking about are massive success stories. I work for a startup. When I joined, we were 20 something people. We're now over 200. It has been an incredibly challenging, difficult journey to get to this point. When you think of a retailer that has 1,000 or hundreds of locations, they have achieved so much to get to that point. There is something there of a brand identity, of a brand relationship, of something they're doing right. Are they taking the time to understand what they as a brand have done to create that value, what their customers want and expect from them, and how their customers are evolving? So take an example like, we were talking about online deliveries. What do I want from an online offering changes from brand to brand. For my grocery store, I don't care. I need it every now and again. From the brand who makes the polo shirts that I like, I want to try on the shirt once and then I'm relying on e-commerce the rest of the way. And so do you get your customers? Are you looking at the data, both your own, others, understanding how you perform in context to realize what are the right things? Because when you know your audience and you know yourself, figuring out which innovations are necessary to bridge the gap is going to be a whole lot easier. And that's what we mean. And that's why platform in many ways is a channel to reach audiences. So it's an impersonal mechanism to drive a personal connection. And it's like a phone, like a cell phone. So if you go out to eat and everyone's sitting there on their phone while sitting at a table together, that's somehow breaking personal, even though at the same time, if I'm living in a different country as a friend, the fact that we can use that same phone to keep a personal relationship so close. So the concept of platform can be used to drive personal relationships, or it can be used to separate them. But it is on every brand to ask who their audience is, who they are, and how they use these platforms to drive real relationships.
Hey, Deborah, can I stick my nose in here for just 2 seconds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Ethan.
Yes.
I have said that the words retail store is a huge barrier to transformation, because when any of us hear those two words, in our minds, we get a visual of a big building with a lot of stuff in it. So that's why I like your word platform, and that is what I use most often. But it truly is, and I don't know what another word would be better to get the point across. But anyway, it's a good question, and I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm excited. You follow up with me. I'm at Ethan at Placer.ai. I want to hear your word.
Okay, so last question. Here's your shot. So if you were leading a retail organization today, under all the circumstances that we've been discussing, what's the first thing that you would do?
Oh, but so to unfairly answer this question, like it depends on who I am. So if I'm an off-price retailer, I'm doing something fundamentally differently than if I'm a digitally native brand coming offline for the first time, or if I'm a grocery store. And it's the first thing I'm doing, I am ingesting as much data as I possibly can, both speaking to my audiences, talking to people in the shopping center, speaking with potential partners, trying to understand who these people are and who my customers are so that I can provide them the ideal experience. Because it doesn't matter what type of retailer you are, if you know your audience, you're going to reach them more effectively.
Well said.
Yep.
Thank you so much. If everyone in the retail industry were as enthusiastic, passionate, articulate, and just optimistic as you are, this whole industry would be flourishing right now. So thank you very much. It's very inspiring.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Come again. Come again.
Please do. And thank you to our audience as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.